G'day, guys. How are you going on this Monday afternoon? I'm here, as you know, in Melbourne, and the weather is beautiful. It was beautiful yesterday. Spent the day on the beach down at Ocean Grove. Oh, it was glorious. Water this time of year is as cold as a mother-in-law's kiss, but it was a magnificent day on the beach yesterday. So I did have plans to put something together on the Sunday, but I just couldn't resist spending the afternoon down the coast at Ocean Grove. So it doesn't really matter because what I wanted to say yesterday can be said today. It's not necessarily based just on the trade period. What I will say is the pick swaps last week. So we've now got 12 and 14. And there is talk that we want to try and get pick number 3. I don't want to talk about that. But the 12 and 14 right here, right now, is a really strong draft hand. And I'm really excited about that because this is, and I keep saying it, I said last year that I wanted to follow the Coates Talent League here in Victoria a lot more closely. And I did exactly that. I've just happened to fall on a really, really outstanding crop of young players coming through. Now, I'm not over the interstate youngsters. I've only got so much time, but I've been to so many Coates Talent League games this year, and this excites me, the fact that we now have 2 picks inside the top 20 rather than just 1. If that's the way we go. And I must admit, having 2 instead of 1, you can go, okay, let's invest in a key forward. A key defender. Could be a key forward, but probably more so a key defender. That, I feel like it's becoming less likely, if I'm being honest, because it feels like there's so many holes with our list across every line. So what I will say is I'm leaning slightly towards hoping that Nick Austin takes those picks to the draft because it is such a strong draft, and I feel like this list of ours needs to be freshened up, not just for the now, but definitely for the future as well. I mean, I love Dan Houston, I really do, and I've made it really clear that he's exactly the type of player that could help us with our ball movement. And I watched Brisbane Lions play this year, and I think the most impactful football for the Brisbane Lions this year wasn't Lachie Neale, it wasn't Harris Andrews, it wasn't Joe Danaher, wasn't Josh Dunkley, wasn't Cam Rayner, but it was Dane Zorko across half back. And it came out of necessity, but an elite ball user, brave ball user. Every time Dane Zorko got the ball, the way he used him this year, it's just like you watch him hit a target, not only with penetration, but just changing the angles. And it was just a pleasure to watch. And it just was in stark contrast to the way we play. I'm not saying, I don't want to go down the line that we've just got a whole list of blokes who butcher the ball, but yeah, I just don't see it. So I feel like Dan Houston would help us, but I don't see him coming in and necessarily going, bang, we've got Dan Houston. We're suddenly become a super chance of winning a premiership in 2025. In fact, it's probably not so much the opposite, but this video is more around, I think the club are aligned. I think the club are nearly aligned. And this is, please, because this is only a feeling. But when I talk about aligned, the board, the president, CEO, the footy manager, the head of football, the coaches, and the list management team, Nick Austin, Mick Agresta, and Paul Brodie, that's the team. I get a sense that the list management team feel like that this list we currently have, I'm not saying it's nowhere near good enough, but is a fair way off. a fair way off. And I'm leaning towards that myself now, rather than pointing the finger at the coaches. Now, they've got a lot to prove, and this is not letting Michael Voss and his assistants off the hook at all. At all. But I'm not talking about 30 years since we last won a flag. I don't want to talk about the rebuild anymore, that this has been going on since 2014, because you've got to separate this rebuild in the last 11 years, whatever it's been, since Stephen Silvani jumped on board at the end of 2014 and Brendan Bolton was... You can't bracket that all in just the one and say, well, we're into year 12 or whatever. I feel like this is in two parts. And the second part is the list that was inherited by Nick Austin, Mick Agresta, Paul Brodie, and what it needs to become to be a top-notch, consistent football team across the home and away season, then to get into finals and win a premiership. And I still feel like we are a hell of a long way off with that. And I think there's a little bit of debate going on within the club, and it's probably healthy debate between maybe Nick Austin and Michael Voss. But I think Brian Cook and now Graham Wright coming into the club is such a good thing, because I think they're really level-headed and has seen some things said over the last 12 months to 14 months from some key figures in this football club that I want to share with you. I've shared the Mick Agresta comments with you before. So why am I thinking this way? And I personally think, I'm not letting Michael Voss and the coaches off the hook, but I personally think this list, it just isn't good enough. It isn't good enough, and it is still rather top-heavy. This is what Mick Agresta said in 2 interviews, and he is our national recruiting manager. These were both on Gettable with Riley Beveridge and Cal Toomey. One about 11 months ago, just before last year's national draft, and this one before the mid-season draft. He was posed a question twice about Carlton being what you guys are in the window now. You only need to add this and this, okay, to become, like... And Mick Agresta said twice in 2 separate interviews. He said, we feel like we are just at the start of our journey. And I was taken aback by that. I really was. At the time, I was taken aback. In fact, I found it quite offensive, the fact that we've gone through such this long and painful rebuild since late 2014 to 2015 for one of the people on your list management team to say we feel like we're just at the start of our journey. And then Brian Cook, at the start of 2023, was posed a question about our list management. It was around about just before the time that we were trying to sign TDK and all the talk around TDK and where he was going to go. And Brian Cook said back in May of 2023 that he felt list management at our football club was still an issue. And he saw that we were still really top-heavy. And what that meant was top-heavy in regards to players on a list who were obviously top echelon footballers in the competition, but it just fell away. And that's from Mick Agresta, experienced campaigner in list management, the Sydney Swans, etc. And that's from Brian Cook, arguably the greatest CEO of all time. He's been at the West Coast Eagles, saw the build there, was at Geelong, saw the build there. And then Patrick Cripps, after this season, was interviewed by the football club, and he said on about 3 or 4 occasions that we are still such a really solid club. We're probably a good club now, but just a solid club. And what the trade period does, guys, it really puts a spotlight, particularly on the teams that didn't win the grand final. And more in particular, the teams, like we fell away this year. We really did. And I know the injuries. Okay, I know that. And I don't want to talk about the injuries. I really don't. because I still think there are issues outside of the injuries. But the trade period from a positive really puts the spotlight on us about as supporters looking at our list and looking at the weaknesses and the strengths and what we need. But we also get a real sense of potentially what other clubs really feel about your players outside of, there'd be clubs who'd love to get their hands on TDK. There'd be players, players at our football club opposition clubs who'd love to get their hands on Jacob Wiedering or Harry or Charlie. But when we offer up Matthew Kennedy, Lewis Young and Matt Owies to explore their options, and there's no takers. And I know a couple of those, Matt Owies is out of contract, but Lewis Young, Matthew Kennedy, no takers. No one's interested. Just no one's interested. And it's similar to since Nick Austin took over. O'Brien was gone. Where's Lockie O'Brien now? Gone. Setterfield, no real interest. Essendon wanted him, but what did we get for Will Setterfield? Absolutely nothing. We virtually got nothing for Petrevski-Seaton. I know we turned that, I think, into Lewis Young in the end, but we didn't. That was a former top 5 draft pick. There was little or no interest outside of the West Coast Eagles. Paddy Dow the same. Liam Stocker the same. Even Zach Fisher last year. There just never seems to be a lot of interest into any of our players outside of the top echelon. And I think that says more about your list. It really does. And I think there's still a hell of a lot of work to go. Even someone like Jack Carroll, a young player who I think's been asked to explore his options as well. Really? I mean, I think clubs would be happy to wait until Jack Carroll's delisted because they know, and if they'll give him an opportunity, might chuck him onto a rookie list. Jack Martin the same. We knew there would be no takers, so let's delist him. And then Geelong jumped on him. So, I don't know. I don't think it's a C+ grade list, like I said in the thumbnail, but it's bordering on that. It really is. And I'm trying to get my head around, and help me out here. This isn't a knock on Stephen Silvani, because a lot of water's gone under the bridge since he left. But is Nick Austin and this current list management team mopping up the mess that was created? Or are they, in an essence, creating some of their own mess themselves? That's what I'm trying to get a read on. It just feels like there's a lack of real depth at this football club, and I mean real depth. Still list cloggers outside of the blokes that have been delisted, outside of the guys that we've asked to explore trades. I feel like there's still list cloggers. Poor users by foot, lack of genuine skill and footy nous, players with average foot speed, and yeah, I'm not saying that we can't be in a position to play finals football this year. I just don't think this is a good enough, right here, right now, this is a good enough list, okay, to be winning a premiership. Not now, not next year. And whether the window, whatever window we talk about, or whatever made-up window, like we are in the window now, but the club have always said that they are after a sustained model, and I mean a sustained model. And maybe the decisions that are being made now will hold us in better stead over the next 5 to 6 years, rather than being too, and I know that the word impatient, because we've been fucking so patient for so long, but it is what it is. This isn't a strong list that we've got at the moment, and I think I think the club deep down know it. They're not going to openly admit it in so many words because that would be disastrous from a membership point of view. But I think they're well aware that there are so many deficiencies that need to be fixed. And I also think that there might be at times a bit of pressure from, say, Voss to bring in more experienced players. So I think he'd be the one really pushing for Dan Houston, just like he really pushed for Orazio Fantasia last year. I think Nick Austin wants to go to the draft. I really do. I think he wants to bring in the talent to build a list which him and Mick Agresta believe to be a list which can contend not only in 2 or 3 years' time, but for years after that as well. So please think about that carefully, because, yeah, I'm leaning towards a list which isn't good enough rather than a list which is coached poorly. Speak soon.